Two pivotal developments reshape both global diplomacy and European political dynamics. In the Middle East, indirect nuclear talks between Washington and Tehran have resumed after months of rupture and rising military tensions. With Oman mediating discussions, both sides cautiously test the possibility of renewed engagement, while regional pressure, strategic mistrust, and external political actors continue to complicate the negotiations. Meanwhile, in Europe, Portugal has delivered a decisive electoral verdict. Socialist José Seguro has won the presidency in a landslide victory over a far-right challenger, reflecting a broader contest between mainstream democratic forces and populist movements across the continent. Together, these developments highlight how diplomacy, security, and domestic politics are increasingly intertwined in shaping global stability. I'm Henny Saif. Let's get in focus. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has traveled to the United States for a strategic meeting with the U.S. President Donald Trump and senior officials to discuss the stalled U.S.-Iran nuclear negotiations and contingency plans if talks fail. According to the Jerusalem Post, the session will address both diplomatic strategy and potential military options, including a possible U.S. strike. Netanyahu is accompanied by key security aides. U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance said Trump seeks a broad and comprehensive agreement and will set any red lines, emphasizing mutual benefit from a deal. Washington has warned U.S.-flagged vessels to avoid Iranian waters amid security concerns. Meanwhile, Iran has hardened its stance, suggesting it might dilute its 60% enriched uranium stockpile only if all sanctions are fully lifted. After months of escalating tensions and diplomatic deadlock, Washington and Tehran have cautiously returned to the negotiations. Indirect nuclear talks mediated by Oman are now underway, signaling a potential reopening of diplomatic channels following last year's conflict and military escalations. Yet while dialogue has resumed, mistrust remains deeply entrenched, and regional actors continue to shape the negotiating environment. To understand where these talks are heading, we're joined from Washington by Mr. Justin Thomas Russell, the Executive Director of the Global Foreign Policy Center. Mr. Russell, welcome to In Focus. What does Netanyahu's timing in traveling to Washington tell us about Israel's assessment of the U.S.-Iran talks?
Well, it's good to see you, Henny, as always. Thanks for having me. Look, this is not, this is not a coincidence. Benjamin Netanyahu sees the talks happening. Benjamin Netanyahu is here to make the case that Iran does, in fact, pose an existential threat to the national security of Israel and Israelis all over the world. I think it's an argument that's going to probably fall on slightly deaf ears. This is a president that is looking to make a deal. He's looking to get another international win. And I think what's happening is that Netanyahu's going to hedge his bets and see if he can get some sort of more aggressive stance on Iran rather than a deal in order to promote his interests. And Benjamin Netanyahu's interest is to stay in power and to expand the sphere of Israeli power.
Mm-hmm. Well, there was a lot of talk about red lines being set. Now, is Israel trying to shape U.S. red lines on Iran before the negotiations reach a critical phase? And if so, what sort of red lines are we talking about?
Look, I mean, I think the entire world is aware of the fact that Benjamin Netanyahu would love to have Donald Trump and the U.S. armed forces do its dirty work for Israel. The red lines would be: look, you have a ballistic missile program that can hit the Israeli homeland in a few minutes. That is a threat. You have basically 800 pounds of enriched uranium that's floating around the Iranian countryside. That's never good. And on top of the fact that you've got a instability inside the government, which makes your central government and President Peshkarian and the Ayatollah much more dangerous. So the red lines are clear, I think. Get rid of your ballistic missile program, find and destroy and get rid of your enriched uranium. Don't enrich any more uranium. Those are going to be the red lines, I think, that Benjamin Netanyahu are going to push. The biggest one, I think, and this is probably going to be the biggest discussion point, are the proxies. The proxies are a continued headache for Israel. They're definitely a continued headache for United States security interests and the interests of our regional partners. Iran is going to have to get them under control. Iran wants sanctions lifted. They need an economy. Their economy is in the tank. They need it in order to stabilize some of the protests.
Mm-hmm. Well, if Netanyahu does want the U.S. to do a military job on Iran, how credible then is the threat of the U.S. or a joint military strike if diplomacy collapses? Do you feel the U.S. would simply just easily cede to Netanyahu's wishes?
I wouldn't say it would easily cede to Netanyahu's wishes, Haney. I mean, what we're seeing is, look, regional partners such as Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and I believe Jordan have all said that they will not allow U.S. or allied forces to use its airspace in a preemptive attack on Iran. At the same time, we're seeing our NATO partners ramp up a presence in Southern Europe and Western Asia that is indicative of possibly a standby to standby stance to get ready to back up the U.S. should they use military force against Iran. The reality that we have to deal with here is that military force, we're getting very quickly to a mutually assured destruction situation here. And I say this because if we look at the stance of Iran, Iran has no economy. It needs to be integrated back into the economic fray globally if it wants to sustain itself. And in order to do that, they're going to have to make concessions to the U.S. and our regional partners in the U.S. Mm-hmm. At the same time, the U.S. is going to have to realize that in order to do this, we can't dictate internal defense measures for Iran. They're a sovereign country. We can try all we want, but they don't have to listen.
Mm-hmm. Well, whether the negotiations do work or not, the two options are on the table: diplomacy or a contingency military plan. What would be the priority for the U.S.?
See, that's the big $1 million question we have here in Washington, is nobody knows. Donald Trump has kind of invoked this 1970s Richard Nixon madman diplomacy kind of strategy, which for Richard Nixon, it kind of worked, but it hasn't really worked well for Donald Trump. We don't know. At any given point, Donald Trump could wake up one day and go, you know what? Let's go into Tehran. And then he could wake up another day and say, you know what? I want a peace prize. I'm going to negotiate a longstanding peace and bring stability to the region. There is just no real way to determine where this could go. There's plans in place for both. Our hope, at least in our organization, our hope is that they use mediation and diplomacy, because armed conflict just is not going to go well and could spark a larger, more destructive regional conflict.
Mm-hmm. Well, looking at that visit, do you think it potentially could harden positions rather than revive negotiations?
it depends on the approach that Netanyahu takes, and quite frankly, it depends on what kind of mood Donald Trump wakes up in. I mean, there's another side factor that we have to look at here, is that while Benjamin Netanyahu is playing this trip to the audience of Donald Trump, he's got to be very careful that he does not lose sight of the fact that Congress is going to want to say in this. Question is, how does he sell this to Congress to get total buy-in to either not put pressure on the White House should Donald Trump decide to use military force, or does Benjamin Netanyahu kind of sweet talk his way into playing both sides, saying, all right, if you guys decide not to, I'm going to need funding to really ramp up some stronger national defense capabilities and put the pressure on Congress to appropriate that. There's a lot of moving pieces, and I think that this trip, while the overarching message is kind of clear, I think that the strategy on this trip is going to be very fluid for Netanyahu and his entourage.
In a wider scope, what are the regional consequences if talks entirely fail? Are we closer to deterrence or confrontation?
Depending on what the triggers are for any failure of these discussions there in Muscat, the end result is going to be armed conflict. I don't see there being kind of an in-between. That being said, you start bringing in armed conflict. The U.S. hits Iran. Iran fires back at Israel. That instigates Hezbollah as a proxy. They start violating the peace agreement. That gets Hamas all stirred up. They start using them as proxies. It puts a great deal of pressure on President al-Shara in Syria. That could fall apart very quickly, and that's a win for Donald Trump. And then next thing you know is, we've got a domino effect and greater, larger scale armed conflict instability in a region that, quite frankly, can't handle it or doesn't need it.
Mr. Russell, domestic political pressures do exist in both Tehran and Washington. How do internal political dynamics going to be influencing the negotiating flexibility?
That's a great question, Haney, and I think that's something that we're analyzing almost on a daily basis right now. I mean, right now Donald Trump has an approval rating that's pretty low, particularly with somebody that was supposed to be looked at as the president of enforcing the strength or peace through strength mantra. The fact that he's got a low approval rating and the American electorate doesn't want to hear about what he's doing overseas. They want food on their table. They want affordable housing. They want all of the kitchen table items that we talk about during election season. And it seems like Donald Trump is losing ground on that because he's so hyper-focused on these big deals overseas and wanting a peace prize. Mm-hmm. For Iran, it's a different set. This is the survival of the power of the Ayatollahs and the Islamic Republic. The reality in Tehran is they need to stabilize their economy. It's in a free fall. Mm-hmm. What we found globally is when Iranians have affordable housing, they can put a roof over their family's head, put food on the table, they tend not to want to blow things up. So there's pressure on the central government in Tehran, on both Peskarian and Ayatollah Khamenei, to get some way back into stabilizing and growing their economy.
Yeah, well, it does seem that Iran wants the negotiations to actually work. Confidence-building measures are frequently mentioned by the Iranian officials. What form could these measures realistically take? Are we talking about diluting the uranium? Will that work? Will that please Washington and maybe Israel as well?
know if it'll please Israel. I mean, look, nothing's really going to please Israel. But as far as what would make the U.S. happy and what would give an argument for our regional partners such as Qatar, Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Oman and Egypt, the ammo to go to Donald Trump and say, take this deal, this is a good deal. We saw the fact that yesterday the powers that be in Tehran were talking about the idea that they would be amenable to reducing the uranium enrichment in a nuclear program. Iran has said that they want a nuclear program for peaceful purposes. And if that's the case, then they're making that segue. I think that would be a good one. I think a quiet, unwritten agreement that says, look, we won't be, I'm trying to find the right word, we won't enable all of these proxies that you talk about us having. We won't enable them to take progressive strikes against Israeli or Western targets. That, I think, would be a great olive branch to help de-escalate some of the tensions. But, again, nobody really knows unless Donald Trump decides to buy in.
Mr. Justin Thomas Russell from Washington, thank you very much for your insights and your input. While geopolitical diplomacy unfolds in the Middle East, Europe is witnessing a significant political shift shaped not by negotiations, but by voters. Portugal's presidential election has delivered a decisive outcome that could influence political debates across the European Union. Portugal has elected António José Seguro, a moderate central-left socialist, as president with about 66 to 67% of the vote, defeating far-right Chega leader André Ventura in the runoff. Politico stated that Securo's victory marks the first socialist presidency in 2 decades and reflects a broad cross-party effort to block the rise of far-right populism. Ventura's Chega, which has rapidly grown since 2019 and is now the main opposition force in parliament, nonetheless secured a record share of support, signaling enduring right-wing momentum. Seguro campaigned on stability, democratic values and cooperation with the centre-right government, pledging to be a unifying figure. Analysts see the result as both a rebuke to divisive politics and a reminder of the far-right's entrenchment in Portuguese politics. Portugal has elected socialist candidate António José Seguro as president in a landslide victory, defeating the far-right challenger André Ventura in a historic runoff election. The result reflects not only domestic political realignment, but also broader European debates surrounding populism, democratic resilience and political moderation. To analyze the wider implications of the results of this election, we are joined from Copenhagen by Esma Bez, the editor-in-chief of Denmark 24. Welcome, Ms. Abes. Does António José Seguro's victory suggest there is a ceiling to the far-right growth in Europe? How significant is this election as a response to the far-right surge across the European continent?
Good evening, and thank you for having me. What we saw in Portugal, it reflects a movement in Europe against the populists. Well, we, of course, have seen populist rise in countries such as France, Germany, Hungary, Italy, but still we have a significant move also for the center parties. And if we just analyze a bit what happened in these elections in Portugal and how voters are going to the center and they want to stay in the moderate policies, We saw how the center right, which are the conservatives, supported the left elected person, the left elected new president. They did not support the radical or the extreme or the far right elected nominees. So this tells about where Europe is going and where the voters are going in the European policies, especially when when elections come. Um, Many debates are start to rise, such as migration, economic, nationalism, uh, so many files. And here we can see that Portugal reflects a mirror of what would happen in the next elections coming across Europe. For probably for example, we have elections in Denmark. It will have to be this year in 2026. This, of course, would be monitored by what's happening now in Portugal, and it in a way or another reflects how cohesion of the voters can lead to.
Mm-hmm. Well, Seguro spoke about cooperation with the centre-right government. How might his presidency shape the relations? What will be the nature of the cooperation with a centre-right government then?
If we now go across Europe governments, we can see fragmented governments. This became normal in the last decade. This, of course, is not ideal for the governments because, in a way or another, they make it so long. They make it longer to make decisions. It make it slower in rising debates about migration, economics. It also allow fragmentation even between the people of one country. So these type of governments are now normal in Europe, and people are still. If we see at, like, for example, the right wing, they are not anymore marginal. They are not marginal anymore now. They used to be like a opposition, but now, despite of the defeat of the right wing candidate, now even if he won like probably 1/3 of the voters' voices, but still the populists in Europe, they have a very good structure that makes deep debates on so many files that touches touches the voters in their daily basis lives.
Mm-hmm. Well, European leaders have welcomed the outcome as support for democratic and pro-European Union values. How symbolic is this result for the whole of the European Union?
Actually, this fact is very important for the EU leaders because when left wing, or at least when the moderate center or the moderate centrist or the left wing parties win, this means a stronger EU collaboration. Because as you may know, that the far right, they do not encourage the traditional institutions such as the EU. They want more independence. Not everyone, not all of them would agree upon the security systems and the Eurozone and the migration systems. So this gives a very good signal for the EU that they still can collaborate within this EU institutional. So that's why they are welcoming these results coming from Portugal.
What role do presidential systems play in containing the extremist parties compared to parliamentary elections? Can far-right parties, for instance, win protest votes without converting them into governing power?
Now, in this example, in case the centrist or the left-wing parties fail to achieve what the people is looking for among the economic and the social issues, well, there's a very big chance for the populists to raise again after, for example, 5 years in Portugal, or after a few years or 1 or 2 years in other European governments. So people are still giving the right wing and the centers chances to perform better, but at the same time, the populists are also rising, and they are also rising with they have a very good structures in debating and in rising debates. And also, there's one concern that probably the voters has. They didn't want to go extremely right because they have a memory of long wars in Europe. Like the history shows them how this extremism, where this extremism led them, and to what wars they have seen in the past, and or they had seen in the past. Now they want to be more free. They want more freedom. They want to be more diverse. So whenever the whenever the left wing offer them this, and also if they can still maintain a good systems of like if they still can maintain probably avoiding high cost living, good migration control, borders control. I think there's still, I think voters would still go for the center and left-wing parties rather than going to the far extreme right-wing parties.
Mm-hmm. So do you see this as a win for the center or left-wing parties in Europe, or maybe for Europe in general? Is Europe seeing this center-left win as a consolidation against the far right now, or just a tactical resistance in order to stay away from being extreme right?
I think it's more likely a tactical resistance, because as I mentioned, like the right wing tempts the voters with number one, the good, like much better economic life, and also then the migration and borders. But at the same time, voters do not want to go extremely right, because it would also affect their diversity and their free of expression in some countries. So that's why voters are still trying to maintain something in the middle, like center right or center left. For example, the conservatives are center right. When we speak about socialists, they are center left. So voters are still within these borders or these limitations, but this doesn't mean at all that they cannot be tempted by the right wing parties, especially if the left-wing parties fail to come with to keep their word and to perform much better than they used to do in the probably in the last decade, for example, especially when it comes to economic and migration.
Mm-hmm. Do you see the rest of Europe following the Portuguese example? France, Germany, Italy, they do face similar pressures. Do you think they will be following Portugal?
Absolutely, they are under pressure. Even if they now, if we take Portugal as an example, even when the right challenger is defeated now, but of course they still have a very good structure, as I mentioned, and they make a high pressure on decision making, because in many European parliaments we can see like the governments are minority, so they still have to collaborate. They still have to show some cohesion between the left-wing parties and the right-wing parties. They have to intersect in some folders where they have to meet actually and make decisions, and this is what makes these governments minority governments under high pressure from the right wing, and also much slower decision making.
From Copenhagen, that was Ms. Esma Abbes. Ms. Abbes, thank you very much for joining us here on In Focus. As diplomacy cautiously resumes between Washington and Tehran, and democratic voters reshape Portugal's political landscape, These parallel developments highlight a world navigating uncertainty through dialogue and electoral choice, from nuclear negotiations shaping regional security to political shifts redefining Europe's democratic direction. Coming months will test the resilience of both diplomacy and governance. That's all the time we have for this episode of In Focus. I'm Henny Saif. Thank you for joining us.